Hi everybody, this is Ellman, the blue collar investor, with today's covered call writing question of the day. Today's question comes from Frank. Alan, on May 15th, I received a 40-cent dividend from Costco, but on February 27th, the dividend was $5. Why is there such a big difference in the dividend amount, and how do these affect our option trades? Thanks, Frank. Well, Frank, the thing that we need to know is there are actually two types of dividends that corporations can distribute. The first one are known as standard dividends. Those are the ones that most of us know about, and they're basically distribution of a portion of a company's earnings that go to shareholders normally on a regular or quarterly basis. And those are expected and predetermined. Now, the other type of dividend is known as a special dividend. And these are normally one-time cash dividends distributed by a corporation that has a lot of extra cash at hand. And obviously they're distributed to help enhance the relationship between the company and its shareholders. Now, one of the important things to know about is sometimes the rules are a little different for these special one-time cash dividends, particularly as they apply to ex-dividend dates. Now, the ex-dividend date is the date that we must own the shares by in order to capture the dividend. For standard dividends, the ex-dividend date is normally 2 days prior to the record date, and so that means we have to buy our shares at least 3 days prior to the record date. And then comes the ex-date, and then the record date, and then after that comes the distribution of the dividend. Now, as far as these special one-time cash dividends, if the distribution of the dividend, if the amount is 25% or less of the value of one share of stock, then the normal standard ex-dividend date rules apply. So then again, the ex-date would be 2 days prior to the record date. We must own the shares 3 days prior to the record date or prior to the ex-date. However, if the amount of the dividend with these special dividends is greater than 25%, then the rules change. There are special ex-date rules, and the ex-date is moved to the day after the payment date, which means that if a stock is purchased after the record date, but still before the ex-date, still going to capture that dividend. So it's the ex-date that will determine who receives the dividend. Now, let's specifically go to Costco, the thrust of your question here, and it was publicly framed, as you could see on the screenshot there, where the ex-date was Thursday, February 5th. And since the $5 distribution was way less than 25% the value of one share of Costco, that means the normal or standard dividend ex-date rules apply. So it would be 2 days prior to the record date, which means we have to buy the shares 3 days prior to the date. So February 4th is the date we must buy the shares in order to capture that dividend. Now, the $5 dividend means that everybody who owns the shares is going to get $5, but the value of the stock will decline by that amount because the company has that much less cash. Therefore, the shares are worth that much less. Also, the strike prices of the options are going to decrease by the amount of the special dividend, $5. So, for example, if Costco had a strike price of $150, well, that means that the value of the shares would drop by $5 on the ex-date, and the strike price would also drop to $145 in that particular situation. I mean, think of it from the vantage point of a call buyer who bought a $150 call hoping the price of the stock would go up to increase the value of that option. But on the other hand, the value is actually going to go down prior to expiration by at least $5, the amount of the dividend. So to make everybody whole, the OCC will decrease the strike prices by $5. Let's actually have a look at the chart of Costco, and you can see by the arrow in the middle of the screenshot that the price of the stock did in fact decline on the ex-dividend date, February 5th. So let's summarize. There are two types of dividends that can be distributed by a corporation: the standard and the special one-time cash dividends. Special dividends apply to companies that have a lot of extra cash. And the ex-date may have different rules if the amount of the dividend is greater than 25% of the value of one share of stock. And that means the ex-dividend date will actually determine who receives the dividend. Whether it's prior to the record date or after the record date, everything is determined by the ex-dividend date. And of course, share value and strike price will decline by the amount of the dividend to be distributed. So there you have it, Frank. There's always an explanation, as crazy as things seem to be. And in this particular case, the explanation is that there were two different types of dividend. The $5 dividend being just a one-time special dividend. So, Frank, I want to thank you for that question. It does come up from time to time, and it does impact our option strike prices and the value of our shares. So it's important that we understand this. And of course, thanks to everybody else out there watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you benefit from it. As always, this is Alan Ellman, the Blue Collar Investor. Take care, everybody.